Sometimes the most profound moments in life come disguised as ordinary encounters. A successful businessman walking to his luxury car after another profitable day. A young girl sitting alone on cold concrete, tears streaming down her face, clutching a worn bag like it holds her entire world. Two lives from completely different worlds, about to collide in a way that will challenge everything one man believes about success, family, and what truly matters. What could make a millionaire stop in his tracks? What story could a child's tears tell that would leave a man who's heard every sob story completely speechless? This isn't about charity or pity. This is about discovering that sometimes the smallest person carries the biggest lesson, and sometimes what looks like the end of everything is actually just the beginning. Get ready for a journey that will make you question what real wealth actually means. Marcus Wellington adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stepped out of the gleaming corporate building that housed his investment firm. The setting sun reflected off the glass towers around him, painting the city in shades of gold that reminded him of his latest acquisition. At 42, he had built an empire from nothing, transforming himself from a kid who wore secondhand clothes to a man whose watch cost more than most people's cars. His phone buzzed with notifications. Stock prices, meeting confirmations, dinner reservations at the exclusive restaurant where he was meeting potential investors from Dubai. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Marcus had learned long ago that success was about control, timing, and never letting emotions cloud judgment. The parking garage beneath the building was nearly empty at this hour. Most employees had left by 5, but Marcus often worked until 8 or 9, sometimes later. He thrived on the quiet intensity of those evening hours when deals were made and fortunes were decided. His footsteps echoed against the concrete walls as he walked toward his midnight blue Bentley Continental GT, a machine that represented years of calculated risks and strategic thinking. But as he rounded the corner near the garage exit, something unexpected stopped him cold. There, sitting on the ground next to a concrete pillar, was a young black girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. She was crying quietly, her small shoulders shaking as she clutched a faded pink backpack against her chest like a shield. Marcus paused, his hand halfway to his car keys. In his world, problems were solved with phone calls, contracts, and bank transfers. This was different. This was raw human emotion in its most vulnerable form, and he found himself completely unprepared for it. The girl hadn't noticed him yet. She was focused entirely on whatever was causing her distress, rocking slightly back and forth while tears continued to stream down her cheeks. Her clothes were clean but clearly inexpensive, the kind of practical outfits that spoke of families who shopped carefully and made every dollar count. Her hair was neatly braided with colorful beads that caught the fluorescent light. For a moment, Marcus considered simply getting in his car and driving away. He had a dinner to attend, investors to impress, deals to close. Getting involved in whatever this was could complicate his evening, maybe even his week. But something about the girl's quiet desperation held him in place. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. When he was about 10 feet away, he cleared his throat gently. The girl looked up with wide, startled eyes, quickly wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. Up close, he could see that her eyes were swollen from crying. But there was something else there too. Intelligence, determination, a spark that reminded him of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. The girl studied him for a long moment, taking in his expensive suit, his polished shoes, the confidence that wealth and success had given him. Most adults would have been intimidated, but this child seemed to be evaluating him with an intensity that was almost unnerving. "I'm waiting for my mama," she said finally, her voice small but steady. "She went to see if they have any jobs, but that was a long time ago." Marcus glanced around the parking garage. It was definitely not a place where job interviews typically happened. But then, he noticed something he'd missed before. There was a service entrance near where the girl was sitting, one that led to the building's maintenance and cleaning offices. His company contracted with several service firms, though he'd never paid much attention to the details. "How long have you been waiting?" he asked, crouching down so he was closer to her eye level. The girl shrugged, but her grip on the backpack tightened. "Since school ended. Mama said I should wait here and not move." no matter what. She said she'd come back for me. Marcus checked his watch. It was nearly 7:30. School typically ended around 3 or 3:30, which meant this child had been sitting here alone for over 4 hours. A cold knot formed in his stomach as the implications hit him. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Zoe," she said, then added with a hint of defiance, "Zoe Marie Johnson. And I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, but Mama always said it's okay to be polite when someone's being kind." There was something about the way she said it, with such gravity and maturity, that hit Marcus unexpectedly hard. This wasn't just a lost child. This was a little girl who had been taught to be careful, to be strong, to handle difficult situations with grace. The kind of lessons that came from experience, from a mother who understood that life could be unpredictable and sometimes harsh. "That's a beautiful name," Marcus said. "I'm Marcus. And your mama sounds like a very smart woman." Zoe nodded seriously. "She is. She knows everything about everything. She just needs to find a job so we can stay in our apartment." She paused, then added in a whisper, "We got a notice that said we have to move if we can't pay more money." The pieces were starting to come together, painting a picture that Marcus recognized from his own childhood, though he'd spent years trying to forget those memories. A single mother, probably laid off or between jobs, trying to find work while juggling childcare. An eviction notice hanging over their heads like a sword. A little girl who was old enough to understand that her world was precarious, but too young to do anything about it. "Have you eaten anything today?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer when Zoe's eyes darted away. "I had lunch at school," she said, which wasn't really an answer to his question. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a crack in the careful armor he'd built around his emotions. He thought about his dinner reservation, about the investors who were probably already ordering their first round of drinks. Then, he looked at Zoe, still clutching her backpack, still fighting back tears, still believing with absolute faith that her mother would come back for her. "Tell you what," Marcus said, standing up and extending his hand. "Why don't we go find your mama together? And maybe get something to eat while we're looking." Zoe studied his offered hand for a moment. "Mama said not to go anywhere with strangers." "That's very good advice," Marcus agreed. "But what if we stay right here in the building? We could check with the security guard, see if he's seen her. And there's a coffee shop on the ground floor that has sandwiches. Your mama will probably be hungry when she comes back too." It was a reasonable compromise, and Zoe seemed to consider it seriously before nodding. She stood up, shouldering her backpack, but didn't take his hand. Instead, she walked beside him with the careful dignity of someone much older than her years. As they rode the elevator up from the parking garage, Marcus found himself studying Zoe's reflection in the polished steel doors. There was something about her composure, her quiet strength in the face of uncertainty, that reminded him powerfully of his own childhood. The difference was that he'd faced those challenges alone, while Zoe clearly had someone fighting for her. The security desk in the main lobby was staffed by an older black man named Jimmy, whom Marcus had exchanged pleasantries with hundreds of times over the years. Jimmy's face lit up when he saw Zoe. "Well, if it isn't Miss Zoe," Jimmy said warmly. "I was wondering where you'd gotten to." "You know each other?" Marcus asked, surprised. Jimmy nodded. "Her mama, Carmen, she's been coming in all week, talking to the different service companies. Real determined lady. Zoe here's been keeping me company while her mama's in meetings." He looked down at the girl with obvious affection. "How you doing, sweetheart? Your mama should be finishing up soon." Relief flooded Zoe's face. "She's okay? She's really coming back." "Of course she is," Jimmy said gently. "Mamas don't leave their babies behind. She's just upstairs making sure she gets the best job possible so she can take good care of you." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't even realized was tight. The mother hadn't abandoned her child. She was fighting for her family in the only way she knew how. It was a level of dedication and sacrifice that Marcus understood intellectually but had rarely witnessed firsthand. "Has she eaten?" Jimmy asked Marcus quietly, tilting his head toward Zoe. "We were just heading to the coffee shop," Marcus replied. "Good man," Jimmy said with approval. "And Mr. Wellington? Her mama's a good woman. Smart too. Whatever company's lucky enough to hire her is going to get someone special." As they walked toward the small cafe in the building's atrium, Marcus found himself thinking about Jimmy's words. In his world, Value was typically measured in degrees, certifications, stock options, and quarterly returns. But there were other kinds of value, other forms of wealth that couldn't be calculated on a spreadsheet. The cafe was nearly empty, just a barista cleaning equipment and preparing to close. Marcus approached the counter while Zoe stood nearby, still maintaining that careful distance she'd established. "What would you like to eat?" Marcus asked her. Zoe studied the menu board with intense concentration. "Mama always says to get something that will fill you up," she said finally. "And something that's not too expensive." The casual way she mentioned money considerations broke something inside Marcus. He thought about his own dinner reservation, where he would probably spend more on wine than this family had for groceries in a month. "How about a turkey sandwich and some soup?" he suggested. "And maybe some of those cookies for later?" Zoe's eyes widened slightly at the mention of cookies, but she nodded solemnly. As they waited for the food, she finally asked the question that Marcus had been expecting. "Why are you helping me?" It was a fair question, and one that Marcus wasn't entirely sure how to answer. The simple truth was that he didn't know. In his carefully ordered world, random acts of kindness were typically strategic decisions, investments in relationships that might pay dividends later. This was different. This was impulse, emotion, something that bypassed his usual cost-benefit analysis entirely. "Sometimes," Marcus said slowly, "people help each other just because it's the right thing to do. No other reason needed." Zoe considered this with the seriousness she seemed to bring to everything. "Mama says there are good people and bad people in the world, and the good ones help when they can." "Your mama's right," Marcus said. They sat at a small table near the window, where Zoe could see the elevators and watch for her mother. As she ate her sandwich with careful, measured bites that spoke of a child who had learned not to waste food, Marcus found himself asking questions he'd never thought to ask before. "What's your favorite subject in school?" "Math," Zoe said immediately. "And reading?" "Mama says if you can read and do numbers, you can figure out almost anything." "That's very true. What kind of books do you like?" "All kinds," Zoe said, her face lighting up for the first time since he'd met her. "But especially stories about kids who do big things. Like Harriet Tubman when she was little, or Ruby Bridges. Mama says they were brave even when they were scared." Marcus nodded, struck by the pattern he was seeing. This was a child who was being raised with intention, with values, with an understanding of legacy and possibility that extended far beyond her current circumstances. Carmen Johnson was raising her daughter to believe in herself, to see challenges as temporary obstacles rather than permanent limitations. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" he asked. Zoe put down her sandwich and looked at him with complete seriousness. "I want to help people. Maybe be a doctor or a teacher or someone who builds houses for families who need them. Mama says the world needs people who care about making things better." The simple clarity of her answer, the complete absence of cynicism or self-doubt, reminded Marcus of a time in his own life when he'd had similar dreams. Before he'd learned that success was about accumulation rather than contribution, before he'd started measuring his worth by the size of his bank account rather than the impact of his actions. They were finishing their meal when the elevator doors opened and a woman emerged, moving with the quick, anxious steps of someone who'd been carrying worry for hours. She was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her late 20s, with the same intelligent eyes as her daughter and an air of barely contained exhaustion. "Zoe," the woman called out, relief evident in every syllable. "Mama." Zoe jumped up from her chair and ran to her mother, who swept her up in a fierce hug that spoke of love, relief, and the kind of bone-deep fear that only parents understand. Marcus stood up slowly, watching the reunion, and feeling like an intruder in this moment of pure emotion. The woman over Zoe's shoulder, taking in his expensive suit, his obvious wealth, the fact that he'd been sitting with her daughter. Her expression shifted from relief to wariness in an instant. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but guarded as she set Zoe down but kept a protective hand on her shoulder. "This is Marcus, Mama," Zoe said quickly. "He helped me. He bought me dinner and waited with me, and he was really nice." Carmen Johnson studied Marcus with the same intense evaluation he'd received from her daughter. But there was something harder in her gaze, the vigilance of someone who'd learned that the world could be dangerous for little girls, especially little girls who looked like Zoe. Thank you, she said carefully, but that wasn't necessary. I told Zoe to wait, and I would have come back for her. Of course you would have, Marcus said quickly. I could see that she knew you'd come back. I just thought she might be hungry, and I was here anyway. It was a delicate moment, balanced on the edge of misunderstanding. Marcus realized that his presence, his obvious wealth, might feel threatening rather than helpful. In Carmen's world, men like him probably didn't help little girls out of simple kindness. There was usually an agenda, an expectation, a price that would eventually be demanded. I'm sorry, Marcus said, stepping back to give them space. I didn't mean to overstep. I just saw her crying, and he trailed off, not sure how to explain the impulse that had driven his actions. Carmen's expression softened slightly as she looked between Marcus and her daughter. Zoe doesn't usually trust strangers, she said quietly. She's a good judge of character. Mama, he asked me about school and books and what I want to be when I grow up, Zoe said earnestly. And he said you're smart and that good people help each other. Something in Carmen's posture relaxed at her daughter's words. She looked at Marcus again, this time with curiosity rather than suspicion. I'm Carmen Johnson, she said, extending her hand. And I really do appreciate your kindness, Mr. Marcus Wellington, he replied, shaking her hand. And I hope your meeting went well. Carmen's smile was tired, but genuine. It did, actually. I start Monday morning as part of the overnight cleaning crew. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work with benefits. Marcus nodded, but something about her words nagged at him. Overnight cleaning meant Carmen would be working while Zoe slept, assuming she had childcare arrangements. And starting Monday meant she'd been without income for who knew how long, trying to make ends meet while searching for work. That's wonderful, he said. I'm sure you'll do great. As Carmen gathered Zoe's backpack and prepared to leave, Marcus found himself reluctant to see them go. There was something about this family, about their quiet dignity and obvious love for each other, that had awakened something in him that had been dormant for years. Zoe, he said impulsively, would you like to take some cookies for the road? The little girl looked up at her mother for permission. Carmen hesitated for a moment, then nodded. That's very kind of you, she said. As Marcus walked them to the elevator, Zoe tugged on his jacket. Mr. Marcus? Will we see you again? The question caught him off guard. In his world, encounters like this were typically one-time events, brief intersections of lives that moved in completely different orbits. But, looking down at Zoe's hopeful face, he found himself making a promise he hadn't planned to make. I work in this building, he said. So maybe we'll run into each other again. Marcus spent the weekend thinking about Zoe and Carmen, which was unusual for him. Typically, his weekends were filled with business calls to international contacts, golf games that were really networking sessions, and social events where deals were made over expensive wine. But this Saturday morning found him sitting in his penthouse apartment, staring out at the city skyline, while nursing his second cup of coffee, and wondering about a little girl who measured her meals, and a mother who worked multiple jobs to keep them housed. By Monday morning, he'd made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew him well. Instead of his usual routine of arriving at the office by 7 and diving immediately into market reports, Marcus found himself in the building's main lobby at 6:30, ostensibly reviewing quarterly projections on his tablet, but actually watching for Carmen. She arrived at exactly 6:45, wearing dark blue coveralls and carrying a small lunch bag that looked like it had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and there was something in her posture that spoke of determination mixed with exhaustion. This was someone who had probably been up since 5, getting herself ready for work and making sure her daughter was settled for the day. Good morning, Carmen, Marcus said, looking up from his tablet as she passed. She stopped, surprise flickering across her face before recognition set in. Mr. Wellington, you're here early. I tend to keep unusual hours, Marcus said, which was true, though not typically this early. How was your first day? It's been good so far, Carmen replied carefully. The supervisor seems fair, and the work is straightforward. I appreciate them giving me a chance. There was something in the way she said it that suggested finding work hadn't been easy, that there had been rejections and disappointments before this opportunity came along. Marcus found himself curious about her story, about the circumstances that had led a clearly intelligent woman to be grateful for overnight cleaning work. "If you don't mind me asking," Marcus said, "what field were you in before this?" Carmen hesitated, and Marcus could see her weighing whether to answer honestly or give the kind of vague response that protected her privacy. Finally, she seemed to decide he could be trusted with the truth. "I was a bookkeeper," she said. "Worked for a small accounting firm for 3 years. But they lost several big clients during the economic downturn and had to let people go. I've been looking for something in my field, but—" She shrugged. "Most places want someone with a degree, even for basic bookkeeping work." The pieces clicked together in Marcus's mind. Carmen had skills, experience, a strong work ethic. But she was caught in the gap between overqualification for basic jobs and underqualification for positions that matched her abilities. It was a trap that caught many people, especially single mothers who couldn't afford to take unpaid internships or go back to school full-time. "How long were you looking?" Marcus asked. "For months," Carmen said quietly. "My unemployment ran out 6 weeks ago. We've been living on savings and whatever odd jobs I could find." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "Zoe's been very patient about it all. She's a good kid." For months without steady income. 6 weeks with no unemployment benefits. Marcus tried to imagine the stress of watching savings dwindle while responsibility for a child's welfare weighed on every decision. No wonder Zoe had been so careful about wasting food, so mature in her understanding that their situation was precarious. "She certainly is," Marcus agreed. "Very smart, very well-raised." Pride flickered in Carmen's eyes at the compliment about her daughter. "She's everything to me," she said simply. "Whatever I have to do to give her a good life, I'll do it." The quiet intensity of that statement stayed with Marcus throughout the morning. As he sat through meetings about market projections and asset allocation, he found his mind wandering to a woman who was probably emptying trash cans and mopping floors while her daughter sat in school, unaware of how hard her mother was fighting to keep their small world stable. Around 10:30, Marcus made a decision that his assistant later described as completely out of character. He canceled his lunch meeting with a potential client and instead took the elevator down to the building's management office. "I need to speak with whoever handles the service contracts," Marcus told the receptionist. 20 minutes later, he was sitting across from Elena Vasquez, the building manager, discussing the cleaning services in terms that had nothing to do with cost-cutting or efficiency improvements. "I want to make sure our contractors are paying fair wages," Marcus said, "and that their employees have access to benefits, particularly health insurance and child care assistance." Elena looked puzzled. "May I ask what prompted this concern, Mr. Wellington?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I've become aware that we have some very qualified people working in positions that may not fully utilize their skills. I'm interested in exploring whether there might be opportunities for advancement or skills-based placement within the building." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Marcus had indeed become aware of Carmen's situation, and he was genuinely interested in creating opportunities. The fact that his interest was specifically focused on one person didn't change the validity of the broader concept. "We actually have several openings in property management and administration," Elena said thoughtfully. "But most require specific experience or certifications." "What about bookkeeping?" Marcus asked. "Or accounts receivable? Any positions that might suit someone with accounting experience, but no formal degree?" Elena consulted her computer. "We do have a part-time position in accounts payable that's been hard to fill. It's day hours, basic bookkeeping tasks, processing invoices, and payments. The pay would be significantly better than cleaning wages, and it comes with benefits." What would someone need to qualify? 3 years of bookkeeping experience, familiarity with standard accounting software, attention to detail, reliability. Elena paused. "Are you thinking of someone specific?" Marcus nodded. "Carmen Johnson. She's new to the cleaning crew, but she has exactly the qualifications you described. She's reliable, intelligent, and she needs day hours because she has a young daughter." Elena made a note on her pad. "I could interview her, if she's interested. When does her shift start?" 6:45, Marcus said. "But I'd suggest approaching her carefully. She's proud, independent. She won't want to feel like she's receiving charity." Elena smiled. "Mr. Wellington, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know how to present an opportunity without making it feel like a handout. Marcus left the meeting with a sense of satisfaction that was different from his usual business victories. This wasn't about profit margins or market share. This was about using his influence to create a genuine opportunity for someone who deserved it. But, as the day wore on, he began to second-guess himself. What if Carmen felt manipulated when she discovered his role in the job offer? What if she was offended by his interference in her life? What if Zoe somehow got hurt because he'd overstepped boundaries that he didn't fully understand? These concerns were still weighing on him when he left the office that evening, once again timing his departure to coincide with Carmen's lunch break. He found her in the small employee break room, sitting alone at a corner table with a homemade sandwich and a paperback book. "Good evening," Marcus said from the doorway. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" Carmen looked up, marking her place in the book. "Of course. Though I should warn you, I only have about 20 minutes. Marcus sat down across from her, noticing that her book was a financial management guide. Even on her break, she was trying to improve her skills, prepare for better opportunities. The dedication impressed him, even as it reinforced his conviction that she was wasted in her current position. "How's the first day going?" he asked. "Better than expected," Carmen said honestly. "The team is friendly, the work is straightforward, and my supervisor seems fair. I should be able to handle the physical demands just fine." "That's good to hear. And Zoe? How did she feel about you starting a new job?" Carmen's expression softened. "She was so proud when I told her I got hired. She made me a good luck card with crayons. I keep it in my pocket." She patted her coveralls, and Marcus caught a glimpse of bright purple construction paper. The image of Zoe making her mother a good luck card hit Marcus harder than he expected. Here was a child who understood that her mother's employment was something to celebrate, who was already learning to be supportive and encouraging in the face of adult challenges. "She sounds like a remarkable kid," Marcus said. "She is. Sometimes I think she's too mature for her age, but life has a way of growing kids up faster than you'd like." Carmen took a bite of her sandwich, then added, "She asked about you this weekend. Wanted to know if the nice man from the building might be there when I started work." "What did you tell her?" "That she should focus on school, and let me worry about work." Carmen smiled slightly. "But I also told her that there are good people everywhere, and she has good instincts about recognizing them." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Marcus found himself appreciating Carmen's directness. She didn't fill every pause with unnecessary words, didn't seem to feel the need to manage his impression of her. There was a confidence in her quietude that spoke of someone who was comfortable with herself, even in difficult circumstances. "Carmen," Marcus said finally, "can I ask you something personal?" She nodded cautiously. "When you were looking for work, did you apply for bookkeeping positions that required degrees, even though you had the experience?" Carmen's expression grew guarded. "A few." "What? What happened?" She was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much to share. "Most of the time, I never heard back. The ones that did respond said they were looking for candidates with formal education credentials." She paused. "I understand their position. When you have a lot of applicants, you need ways to narrow the field. But it must be frustrating, knowing you can do the work, but not being able to prove it." Carmen shrugged. "Life isn't always fair. You adapt and keep moving forward." Then, she looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Wellington, can I ask why you're asking me these questions?" It was the moment Marcus had been dreading and anticipating. Carmen was too intelligent not to realize that his interest wasn't casual, and she deserved honesty about his intentions. "Because," Marcus said carefully, "I believe people should have opportunities that match their abilities, not just their credentials. And because I think you're capable of much more than what you're currently doing." Carmen studied his face intently. "That's a nice sentiment. But, in my experience, when wealthy men take an interest in single mothers, there's usually more to it than career advice." The statement hung between them like a challenge. Marcus realized that Carmen was testing him, trying to understand his motivations before deciding whether to trust him. It was a reasonable precaution, given her position and vulnerability. "You're right to be cautious," Marcus said. "But my interest is exactly what it appears to be. I saw a smart kid with a devoted mother, and I was reminded that talent and potential don't always get the chances they deserve. Nothing more complicated than that." Carmen continued to study him for several seconds. Finally, she nodded slowly. Okay, I believe you. But I need you to understand something. I appreciate kindness, but I don't accept charity. Whatever I get in life, I want to earn it. I wouldn't expect anything else, Marcus said. In fact, that's exactly why I think you deserve better opportunities. They finished their conversation with Carmen heading back to work and Marcus returning to his office. But the dynamic between them had shifted. The wariness was still there, but it was balanced now by mutual respect. Carmen had established her boundaries clearly, and Marcus had accepted them without argument. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself taking breaks that coincided with Carmen's schedule, not to interfere or offer unwanted advice, but simply to check in. Their conversations were brief, but gradually became more natural, covering topics from Zoe's progress in school to current events to books they were reading. It was during one of these casual conversations that Elena Vasquez approached them with what appeared to be perfect timing. "Excuse me, Miss Johnson," Elena said. "I'm Elena Vasquez, the building manager. Do you have a moment to speak privately?" Carmen looked surprised but nodded. Of course. Marcus started to excuse himself, but Elena gestured for him to stay. "Actually, Mr. Wellington, since you're here, you might be interested in this conversation too." As they moved to a quieter corner of the break room, Marcus felt his heart rate increase slightly. This was the moment when his behind-the-scenes maneuvering would either create an opportunity or create a problem. "Ms. Johnson," Elena began, "I've been reviewing your employment application, and I noticed you have significant bookkeeping experience." Carmen nodded cautiously. 3 years with Morrison and Associates. "We have a position opening in our accounts payable department. Day hours, better pay than cleaning, full benefits including health insurance, and childcare assistance. Would you be interested in learning more about it?" The shock on Carmen's face was immediate and transparent. She looked from Elena to Marcus and back again, clearly trying to process this unexpected development. Yes, of course I'd be interested," Carmen said slowly. "But I have to ask, is this related to our conversation the other day, Mr. Wellington?" Marcus appreciated her directness even as he felt the awkwardness of the situation. "I may have mentioned to Elena that we have talented people working in positions that don't fully utilize their skills," he said carefully. "But the opportunity is legitimate, and whether you get it depends entirely on your qualifications and performance in the interview." Elena nodded emphatically. "Mr. Wellington's comment made me review our staffing more carefully, but I wouldn't offer an interview to anyone who wasn't genuinely qualified. Your resume speaks for itself." Carmen was quiet for a moment, thinking through the implications. "When would this interview take place?" "Tomorrow afternoon, if that works for you. 2 o'clock in my office. And if I were offered the position, when would it start?" "Next Monday. You'd work directly with our head bookkeeper for the first 2 weeks, learning our systems and procedures." Carmen looked at Marcus again. "This isn't charity." "No," Marcus said firmly. "This is business. Elena needs someone with your skills, and you need a position that matches your abilities. It's a fair exchange." For the first time since the conversation began, Carmen smiled. "Then, yes, I'd very much like to interview for the position." As Elena left to return to her office, Carmen and Marcus stood alone in the break room. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and implications. "Thank you," Carmen said finally. "Don't thank me yet," Marcus replied. "You still have to get the job." "I'll get the job," Carmen said with quiet confidence. "The question is what happens after that." "What do you mean?" Carmen looked directly at him. "I mean, what do you want from me, Mr. Wellington? Because in my experience, when people go out of their way to help others, there's usually something they want in return." The interview took place exactly as Elena had promised, and Carmen got the job based entirely on her qualifications. Marcus learned this secondhand through Elena, who mentioned it casually during their next quarterly review meeting. Carmen herself said nothing about the outcome when he encountered her the following Monday morning, now wearing business casual attire instead of coveralls, carrying a coffee, and what appeared to be a genuine leather briefcase that he suspected was a carefully chosen thrift store find. "Congratulations," Marcus said simply. "Thank you," Carmen replied with equal simplicity. They walked toward the elevator together, and Marcus noticed that Carmen's entire bearing had changed. The exhaustion was still there around her eyes, but there was something else now too. Purpose, perhaps. Or maybe just relief at being able to use her mind for work instead of just her physical strength. How does it feel? Marcus asked as they waited for the elevator. Like coming home, Carmen said. Then, looked surprised at her own words. I didn't realize how much I'd missed working with numbers, solving problems, making things balance. The elevator arrived, and, as they rode up together, Marcus found himself genuinely curious about Carmen's experience. He'd spent so many years focused on high-stakes financial maneuvering that he'd forgotten there could be satisfaction in simpler forms of mathematical precision. What drew you to bookkeeping originally, he asked. Carmen smiled, and, for the first time since he'd known her, she looked completely relaxed. My grandmother. She managed the finances for 3 different churches and somehow made it all work on donations and bake sale money. I used to help her balance the books when I was Zoe's age. She taught me that numbers never lie, and if you can understand what they're telling you, you can make smart decisions. Wise woman, Marcus observed. She was. She also used to say that there's honor in any work that helps people, whether you're managing millions or making sure the church can afford to keep the lights on. Carmen paused. I think she would have liked this job. When they reached their respective floors, Marcus found himself thinking about Carmen's grandmother and the values she'd passed down. There was something powerful about the idea that mathematical precision could be an act of service, that attention to detail could be a form of caring for others. Over the next few weeks, Marcus made a conscious effort to maintain appropriate boundaries while still taking interest in how Carmen was adjusting to her new role. Their interactions were limited to casual encounters in the elevator or lobby, brief conversations that confirmed she was doing well without crossing into territory that might make either of them uncomfortable. What he learned, mostly through Elena's periodic updates, was that Carmen was exceeding everyone's expectations. She'd mastered their accounting software in record time, caught several recurring errors that had been draining small amounts from various accounts, and had even suggested improvements to their invoice processing system that could save both time and money. She's remarkable, Elena told Marcus during one of their routine meetings. I've never seen anyone adapt so quickly or bring such immediate value to a position. Marcus felt a satisfaction that was entirely different from his usual business victories. This wasn't about his own success or profit. This was about having been right about someone's potential, about having played a small role in connecting talent with opportunity. But his sense of satisfaction was complicated by something else, something he was reluctant to acknowledge even to himself. He was becoming genuinely interested in Carmen as a person, not just as a beneficiary of his good intentions. Their brief conversations revealed someone whose intelligence and dry humor appealed to him in ways that had nothing to do with charity or social responsibility. This realization came to a head on a Thursday evening when Marcus was working late and happened to encounter Carmen as she was leaving the building. She was walking with a slight limp, favoring her left foot, and when she saw him notice, she smiled ruefully. New shoes, she explained. I forgot how much dress shoes can hurt when you're not used to them. Marcus looked down and realized that Carmen was wearing what were obviously new pumps, still stiff and unforgiving. The kind of shoes that were necessary for office work, but represented an expense that she probably hadn't budgeted for when she was expecting to be cleaning floors for the foreseeable future. That's rough, Marcus said. Are you walking to the bus? Carmen nodded. It's not far. Marcus knew that the nearest bus stop was 6 blocks away, a significant distance when dealing with painful shoes after a full day of work. Without really thinking about it, he made an offer that surprised both of them. I could give you a ride, he said. I'm heading home anyway. Carmen studied him for a moment, clearly weighing multiple factors. That's kind of you. But I don't want to be any trouble. It's no trouble, Marcus said honestly. And those shoes look like they're going to cause serious damage if you walk 6 blocks. After a brief hesitation, Carmen nodded. Okay, thank you. As they walked toward the parking garage, Marcus found himself nervous in a way he hadn't experienced in years. This felt different from their previous interactions, more personal somehow. He was acutely aware of Carmen beside him, the careful way she was walking, the faint scent of her perfume, the competent manner in which she carried herself despite obvious discomfort. When they reached his Bentley, Carmen stopped short, taking in the sleek lines and obvious luxury of the vehicle. "This is your car," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes," Marcus said simply. Carmen walked around to the passenger side, but paused before getting in. "Mr. Wellington, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How much money do you have?" The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard. In his world, wealth was discussed obliquely, through references to investments and acquisitions and market positions. No one ever simply asked for numbers. "Enough that I don't have to think about bus fare or whether new shoes fit in the budget," Marcus said carefully. Carmen nodded as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "And you really don't want anything from me?" "Nothing at all." Marcus understood what she was really asking, and he appreciated her directness even as it made him acutely aware of the power imbalance between them. Carmen was a single mother with limited resources who had just accepted a job that, while better than cleaning work, still probably paid a fraction of what Marcus made in a week. If he had ulterior motives, she would have little practical recourse. "I want," Marcus said slowly, "to be the kind of person who helps when he can, without expecting anything in return. That's all." Carmen studied his face for several seconds, then got into the car. The ride to Carmen's apartment building took them through neighborhoods that Marcus rarely visited, areas where the housing was older and the businesses reflected the economic realities of working-class families. Carmen provided directions without commentary, but Marcus found himself paying attention to the surroundings with new eyes. When they reached her building, a 3-story brick structure that was clean but clearly dated, Carmen pointed to a unit on the second floor where a child's face was visible in the window. "There's my welcoming committee," Carmen said with obvious affection. Marcus looked up and saw Zoe waving enthusiastically from the window, her face bright with excitement at her mother's unexpected arrival by car. "She's been asking about you," Carmen said as she prepared to get out. "Wondering if we'd see you again." "What have you told her?" "That good people sometimes come into our lives unexpectedly, and we should be grateful for their kindness while they're there." The phrasing suggested temporary presence, as if Carmen expected Marcus to drift out of their lives as suddenly as he'd entered them. It bothered him more than it should have. "Carmen," Marcus said as she opened the car door, "would you and Zoe like to have dinner sometime? Nothing fancy, just, I'd like to get to know you both better." Carmen paused halfway out of the car. "Mr. Wellington." "Marcus," he corrected gently. "Marcus," Carmen said, and the use of his first name felt significant somehow. "Are you asking us on a date?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them had explicitly acknowledged until now. Marcus realized that he was, in fact, asking them on something that resembled a date, though he'd been reluctant to define it that clearly in his own mind. "I'm asking," Marcus said carefully, "if you'd like to spend some time together outside of work. All 3 of us. As friends, if that's what you're comfortable with." Carmen was quiet for a moment, looking up at her daughter's face in the window. "I don't date much," she said finally. "Between work and Zoe, there isn't much time. And when there is time, most men aren't interested in becoming involved with a woman who comes with a ready-made family." "I'm not most men," Marcus said. "No," Carmen agreed. "You're not." She looked at him directly. "But you're also not someone who usually spends time with people like me. What happens when the novelty wears off?" It was a fair question, one that got to the heart of Carmen's concerns about their growing friendship. Marcus could understand her wariness. From her perspective, he was probably a temporary presence in her life, someone whose interest in her family was driven more by curiosity or guilt than by genuine affection. "I don't know what happens next," Marcus said honestly. "But I'd like to find out, if you're willing." Carmen studied his face one more time, then seemed to reach a decision. "Saturday afternoon. There's a park near here with a playground and walking trails. Nothing expensive, nothing that feels like charity. Just spending time together." "That sounds perfect," Marcus said. As Carmen got out of the car, Zoe's face disappeared from the window, and by the time her mother reached the building entrance, the little girl was at the front door, bouncing with excitement. "Mama, was that Mr. Marcus? Did he bring you home in his fancy car?" Marcus could hear Zoe's voice clearly through his open window, and he smiled at her enthusiasm. As Carmen scooped her daughter up for a hug, she looked back at Marcus and waved. Driving home to his penthouse apartment, Marcus found himself thinking about the difference between Carmen's modest building and his own luxurious living space. His apartment was beautiful, professionally decorated, filled with expensive art and furniture. But it was also cold, impersonal, designed more for impressing visitors than for actual living. Carmen's building, on the other hand, showed signs of real life. Children's toys in the small front yard, neighbors talking on the front steps, window boxes with flowers that someone had taken the time to plant, and water. It was a community in ways that his high-end building, with its doormen and security systems and unspoken agreements about privacy, could never be. That Saturday, Marcus found himself more nervous than he'd been before any business meeting or social event. He'd changed clothes 3 times, trying to find something that was casual enough for a park, but not so expensive that it would make Carmen uncomfortable. Finally, he'd settled on khakis and a simple blue shirt, clothes that were undoubtedly high quality but didn't obviously announce their price tags. The park was everything Carmen had promised, a community space where families gathered for picnics and children played on well-maintained but clearly older equipment. Marcus spotted Carmen and Zoe immediately. They were sitting on a blanket under a large oak tree, Zoe reading a book while Carmen watched other families with the relaxed attention of a mother who knew her child was safe and happy. "Mr. Marcus," Zoe called out when she saw him approaching, jumping up from the blanket and running to greet him. "Hello, Zoe," Marcus said, accepting her enthusiastic hug. "What are you reading?" "A book about a girl who becomes a scientist," Zoe said proudly. "She invents things and helps people and never gives up even when other people say she can't do it." "That sounds like a good book," Marcus said. "And it sounds like someone you could relate to." Zoe beamed at the compliment, then took his hand and led him toward the blanket where Carmen was waiting. As they walked together, Marcus was struck by how natural it felt to have this small hand in his, how easily Zoe had accepted his presence in their afternoon. "Thank you for coming," Carmen said as he settled on the blanket beside her. "I wasn't entirely sure you'd show up." "Why wouldn't I?" Carmen shrugged. "Sometimes people make plans they don't really intend to keep, especially when those plans involve spending Saturday afternoon in a public park instead of wherever rich people usually spend their weekends." Marcus realized that Carmen was still testing him, still trying to understand his motivations and predict his behavior. It occurred to him that she'd probably had experience with people who made promises they didn't keep, who offered help or friendship that evaporated when it became inconvenient. "I wanted to be here," Marcus said simply. "This is exactly where I want to spend my afternoon." They spent the next few hours in easy conversation while Zoe played nearby, sometimes joining their discussion, but often content to explore the playground or chase butterflies through the grass. Marcus learned that Carmen was an excellent listener who asked thoughtful questions, that she had strong opinions about politics and education that were informed by real experience rather than theoretical knowledge. He also learned that Zoe was indeed as remarkable as he'd suspected, bright and curious and kind in ways that spoke of excellent parenting under difficult circumstances. She treated Marcus with the easy acceptance of a child who had been taught to judge people by their actions rather than their appearance or status. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't experienced in years. There was something about the simplicity of their gathering, the lack of agenda or expectation, that allowed him to just be present without thinking about what came next or what impression he was making. "Can I ask you something?" Carmen said during one of their quieter moments, when Zoe was occupied with feeding ducks at a nearby pond. "Sure. What's your family like? Do you have kids? Siblings? Parents who wonder why you're spending your Saturday in a park with strangers?" It was Marcus's turn to hesitate, to weigh how much personal information to share. His family relationships were complicated in ways that would be difficult to explain without revealing just how isolated and lonely his successful life had become. "No kids," Marcus said finally. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 25, just as I was starting my business. I have a sister, but we don't talk much anymore. She thinks I changed after I became successful, became someone she doesn't recognize." "Did you?" Carmen asked gently. Marcus considered the question seriously. "Probably. Success changes you, especially when it comes quickly and involves a lot of money. You start to see the world differently, to value different things. And You discover that a lot of people want to be around you for reasons that have nothing to do with who you actually are. That must be lonely, Carmen observed. The simple accuracy of her statement hit Marcus harder than he expected. It was lonely. He'd been lonely for years without fully acknowledging it to himself, filling his time with work and business relationships that served practical purposes but provided little emotional satisfaction. It is, Marcus admitted, which is probably why meeting you and Zoe has been so refreshing. You see me as just a person, not as a business opportunity or a status symbol. Carmen smiled. That's because that's what you are. Just a person. A person who happens to have money, but still just a person. 3 months into their growing friendship, Marcus had settled into a routine that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who had known him before meeting Carmen and Zoe. His Saturday afternoons were spent at the park or at children's museums or simply at Carmen's apartment, where he'd learned to appreciate the comfort of home-cooked meals and board games played around a kitchen table that had seen better days, but somehow felt more welcoming than his expensive dining room set. Zoe had become completely comfortable with his presence, treating him as a natural part of their family constellation. She showed him her homework with the same enthusiasm she showed her mother, asked his opinion on books she was reading, and had developed a habit of saving interesting rocks or leaves to show him during their weekend visits. For Marcus, who had never experienced the uncomplicated affection of a child, Zoe's trust was both humbling and transformative. Carmen had also gradually relaxed her guard, allowing their friendship to deepen into something that felt increasingly significant. They talked about everything from current events to personal dreams, discovering shared interests in unexpected places. Carmen's intelligence and insight challenged Marcus in ways that his usual social circle never had, while her practical wisdom grounded him in realities he'd forgotten during his climb toward financial success. The relationship was still carefully undefined, existing in a space between friendship and romance that felt comfortable for all of them. Marcus had made no demands, expressed no expectations beyond continuing to spend time together. Carmen seemed to appreciate his patience, his willingness to let their connection develop naturally without pressure or ultimatums, which made the phone call on Tuesday morning all the more devastating. Marcus was in his office, reviewing quarterly projections, when his assistant buzzed him with an apologetic tone. "Mr. Wellington? I have Carmen Johnson online too. She says it's urgent." Carmen never called him at work. They'd exchanged numbers weeks ago, but their contact was limited to text messages about weekend plans or brief calls to confirm meeting times. For her to call his office during business hours meant something serious had happened. "Carmen," Marcus said as soon as he picked up the line. "What's wrong?" "It's Zoe," Carmen said, and Marcus could hear the barely controlled panic in her voice. "She collapsed at school this morning. They took her to the emergency room, and the doctors are saying she needs surgery. Some kind of problem with her appendix, but it's complicated because it may have ruptured." Marcus felt the world shift around him. In the months since meeting Zoe, she had become as important to him as if she were his own daughter. The thought of her in pain, scared, and needing help that he couldn't immediately provide was unbearable. "Which hospital?" Marcus asked, already reaching for his jacket. "St. Mary's." "But, Marcus, I need to ask you for something, and I hate that I have to do this." "Anything," Marcus said immediately. "Whatever you need." Carmen's voice broke slightly as she continued. "The surgery is going to cost thousands of dollars. My insurance has a high deductible, and even with coverage, I'm looking at bills I can't possibly pay. I've talked to the financial counselor, and they can set up payment plans, but—" She trailed off, and Marcus could imagine her struggle. Carmen had been so careful to maintain her independence, to ensure that their relationship wasn't based on his financial resources. Asking for help with medical bills must feel like crossing a line she'd hoped never to approach. "How much?" Marcus asked. "They're estimating between $8,000 and $12,000 out of pocket, depending on complications. I know it's not much money to you, but for me it's—" "Carmen," Marcus interrupted gently. "Stop. Just stop. Of course I'll take care of it. Don't give it another thought. I can't just accept that much money from you," Carmen said, and Marcus could hear tears in her voice. "It changes everything between us. It makes you a mother who's doing everything possible to take care of her daughter, Marcus said firmly. That's all it makes you. We can figure out the details later. Right now, the only thing that matters is Zoe getting the best possible care. When Marcus arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, he found Carmen in the surgical waiting room, sitting alone on an uncomfortable plastic chair, staring at her hands. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by worry and the institutional fluorescent lighting that made everyone appear pale and vulnerable. Any news? Marcus asked, sitting down beside her. Carmen shook her head. They took her in about 30 minutes ago. The surgeon said it could take 2 to 3 hours, depending on what they find. She looked at him with eyes that were red from crying. She was so scared, Marcus. She kept asking if she was going to be okay, and I didn't know what to say. Marcus reached over and took Carmen's hand, squeezing gently. You told her the truth, that she's going to be fine, because she has doctors who know how to fix this, and a mother who will make sure she gets everything she needs. They sat in silence for several minutes, surrounded by the quiet activity of a hospital at midday. Other families waited nearby, each dealing with their own crises, their own moments of fear and uncertainty. Marcus found himself thinking about how quickly life could change, how the stability he'd taken for granted could be shattered by something as simple as a child's stomach pain. I should have seen the signs, Carmen said suddenly. She said her stomach hurt yesterday, but she's complained about stomach aches before when she was nervous about tests. I thought it was just anxiety. Carmen, you couldn't have known. Even doctors have trouble diagnosing appendicitis in children sometimes. But if I'd brought her in yesterday, maybe they could have done the surgery before it got complicated. Maybe she wouldn't have to go through this. Marcus recognized the guilt that was consuming Carmen, the natural tendency of caring parents to blame themselves for circumstances beyond their control. He'd seen similar guilt in business partners who second-guessed decisions after unexpected market changes. But this was different. This was about love and responsibility and the weight of another person's well-being. Listen to me, Marcus said, turning to face Carmen directly. You are an excellent mother. Zoe is healthy and happy and confident because of your love and care. One medical emergency doesn't change that. It just means she's human, and humans sometimes get sick. Carmen nodded, but Marcus could see that his words weren't entirely penetrating her worry. She was locked in the awful waiting that came with having no control over something desperately important. Tell me about when she was little, Marcus said, trying to distract Carmen from her anxiety. What was she like as a baby? For the next hour, Carmen shared stories from Zoe's early years. How she'd been born 3 weeks early but determined to make up for lost time. How she'd started talking unusually early and had never really stopped. How she'd insisted on learning to tie her own shoes at age 4 because she wanted to be independent. The stories painted a picture of a child who had always been resilient, always found ways to overcome challenges through combination of stubbornness and intelligence. She gets that from you, Marcus observed during a pause in the storytelling. Gets what? The resilience. The determination to handle whatever life throws at her. She learned that by watching you. Carmen smiled slightly, the first genuine expression of warmth Marcus had seen since arriving at the hospital. She's definitely stronger than I was at her age. I was terrified of everything when I was 8. Zoe seems to think she can handle anything. Because she can, Marcus said. Look at how she's handled the uncertainty of your job situation, the changes in your living arrangements, meeting new people. She adapts because she trusts you to keep her safe, and that trust gives her courage. They were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Patricia Chun, a small woman in surgical scrubs who wore the calm competence that came from years of performing delicate operations. Marcus and Carmen both stood immediately, searching the surgeon's face for clues about Zoe's condition. The surgery went very well, Dr. Chun said without preamble, and Marcus felt Carmen sag with relief beside him. We were able to remove the appendix laparoscopic, which means smaller incisions and faster recovery time. There was some inflammation, but we caught it before any serious complications developed. When can we see her? Carmen asked. She's in recovery now. It'll be about another hour before she's awake enough for visitors, but you can see her briefly then. She'll probably be able to go home tomorrow afternoon if everything continues to look good. As Dr. Chun left to check on other patients, Carmen turned to Marcus with tears streaming down her face. For the first time all day, they were tears of relief rather than fear. "She's okay," Carmen whispered. "She's really okay." Marcus pulled Carmen into a hug, feeling his own eyes blur with unexpected emotion. Somewhere over the past few months, Zoe had become as important to him as his own family would have been. The relief he felt was profound, mixed with gratitude that the surgery had been successful and love for the brave little girl who was probably waking up confused and groggy but fundamentally healthy. "Of course she's okay," Marcus said softly. "She's tough, just like her mother." When they were finally allowed into the recovery room, Zoe was awake but drowsy, connected to various monitors that beeped reassuringly. Her eyes lit up when she saw them, though her smile was somewhat lopsided from the lingering effects of anesthesia. "Mama," she said, reaching for Carmen's hand. "I had surgery, just like the people on TV. How do you feel, baby?" Carmen asked, smoothing Zoe's hair back from her forehead. "Sleepy. And my tummy hurts, but not like before." Zoe's eyes found Marcus standing beside the bed. "Mr. Marcus, you came to see me." "Of course I came," Marcus said, surprised by how emotional his voice sounded. "I wanted to make sure you were taking good care of the nurses." Zoe giggled, a sound that was the most beautiful thing Marcus had heard all day. "They're taking care of me. But I told them my mama is better at taking care of people than anyone." Over the next hour, as Zoe drifted in and out of sleep, Marcus and Carmen took turns holding her hand and making quiet conversation. The crisis had passed, but it had also shifted something fundamental in their relationship. The financial arrangement Marcus had offered was still unresolved, hanging between them like a question that needed to be answered. Finally, when Zoe was sleeping more steadily, Carmen pulled Marcus into the hallway for a private conversation. "About the money," Carmen began, but Marcus held up a hand. "Let me talk first," he said. "I know this is difficult for you. I know accepting financial help feels like it changes the nature of our relationship. But, Carmen, what if I told you that helping Zoe isn't charity? What if I told you that being allowed to care about both of you is the most valuable thing that's happened to me in years?" Carmen studied his face carefully. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that over the past few months, you and Zoe have become my family. Not because of obligation or guilt or some kind of social project. Because I love you both, and when family needs help, you provide it without keeping score." The words hung between them, loaded with implications that neither of them had explicitly acknowledged before. Marcus realized he'd just declared his love for Carmen in a hospital hallway while her daughter recovered from surgery, which was probably not how either of them had imagined such a moment would unfold. Carmen was quiet for a long moment, processing what Marcus had said. Finally, she spoke. "I love you too," she said simply. "I've been trying not to, because it seemed too complicated, too impossible. But watching you with Zoe, seeing how you care about her well-being as much as I do, I can't pretend anymore that this is just friendship." 6 months after Zoe's surgery, Marcus stood in the kitchen of his penthouse apartment, attempting to make pancakes while an 8-year-old supervised his technique with the serious attention of a quality control inspector. The kitchen, which had rarely been used for anything more elaborate than reheating takeout, now showed signs of regular family meals. Crayon drawings were held to the refrigerator with magnets, and a small step stool allowed Zoe to reach the counter when she helped with cooking. "You're not making them round enough," Zoe observed critically, watching Marcus pour batter into the pan. "Mama makes perfect circles." "Your mama has had more practice," Marcus replied, attempting to adjust his technique. "Besides, I think these look like abstract art." Zoe giggled. That's what grown-ups say when something looks weird, but they don't want to admit it. The sound of Carmen's laughter from the doorway made them both turn around. She was wearing one of Marcus's shirts over her pajamas, her hair still mussed from sleep, looking more beautiful than any woman had a right to look at 7 in the morning. "Are you two critiquing my fiancé's pancake skills?" Carmen asked, moving to stand behind Zoe and wrapping her arms around her daughter. "Someone has to maintain quality standards," Marcus said, flipping a pancake with what he hoped was improved technique. Zoe takes her breakfast very seriously. The word fiancé still gave Marcus a small thrill every time Carmen used it. They'd been engaged for 2 months, following a proposal that had been planned with Zoe's full involvement and enthusiastic approval. The ring was modest by Marcus's standards, but had been chosen specifically because Carmen had fallen in love with its simple elegance when they'd gone shopping together. More important than the ring was what it represented, a commitment to building something permanent together. "How did the interview go yesterday?" Marcus asked Carmen as he transferred pancakes to a plate. Elena Vasquez had recommended Carmen for a senior bookkeeping position with a larger property management company, a job that would mean better hours, significantly higher pay, and the kind of career advancement that her skills deserved. "They offered me the position," Carmen said with a smile that was part pride, part disbelief. "Senior accounts manager. It's more responsibility than I've ever had, but the salary is almost double what I'm making now." Marcus set down the spatula and pulled Carmen into a hug, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "That's incredible. I'm so proud of you. What does this mean for us?" Zoe asked, ever practical. "Are we still moving in together?" The question of living arrangements had been a topic of ongoing discussion for weeks. Marcus's penthouse was beautiful but felt too formal for a family, while Carmen's apartment was warm and comfortable but too small for 3 people. They'd been looking at houses in neighborhoods that would work for Zoe's school while still being convenient for both of their jobs. "Actually," Marcus said, "I wanted to talk to you both about that. I found something yesterday that I think might be perfect." Marcus felt something unlock in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying for months without fully recognizing it. "So where does that leave us?" "It leaves us figuring out how to build something real together," Carmen said. "Starting with accepting that sometimes families help each other with medical bills without it being about debt or obligation." They were interrupted by a nurse who needed to check Zoe's vital signs. But as they walked back into the recovery room together, Marcus felt that everything had changed. Not just because of the crisis they'd weathered together, but because they'd finally acknowledged what had been growing between them for months. Watching Carmen adjust Zoe's blanket with tender precision, seeing the love and relief in her face as she looked at her sleeping daughter, Marcus knew he was exactly where he belonged. The wealthy, isolated life he'd built for himself seemed like a distant memory, replaced by something more valuable than any investment portfolio could ever be. As they settled in for what would probably be a long night at the hospital, Marcus found himself thinking about the conversation they'd have when they got home, about how to blend their very different worlds into something that worked for all 3 of them, about the practical considerations of building a life together when their backgrounds and resources were so different. But, for now, it was enough to sit beside Carmen in the uncomfortable hospital chairs, listening to Zoe's steady breathing and knowing that they were committed to facing whatever came next as a family. The crisis had shown them what really mattered, and everything else would figure itself out in time. As they watched Zoe carefully offering pieces of bread to the ducks, making sure each bird got its fair share, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The careful walls he'd built around his emotional life, the protective distance he maintained from meaningful relationships, seemed suddenly less necessary. "Carmen," he said impulsively, "I want you to know that this isn't temporary for me. Whatever's happening here, whatever friendship we're building, I don't see it as something that will fade when the novelty wears off." Carmen looked at him seriously. "How can you be sure?" "Because," Marcus said, "for the first time in years, I feel like myself again. Not the successful businessman or the wealthy investor. Just myself. And that's because of how you and Zoe treat me, like I'm worth knowing for who I am rather than what I have." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Zoe's careful attention to the duck's needs. Finally, Carmen spoke. "Okay," she said simply. "Let's see what happens next." As they packed up their picnic and prepared to leave the park, Marcus realized that he'd crossed some kind of threshold. He was no longer just helping a family in need or satisfying his curiosity about people from different circumstances. He was invested in Carmen and Zoe as individuals, committed to whatever relationship might develop between them. The realization should have scared him. Instead, it felt like coming home. It was a fair question, one that Marcus had been asking himself for days. What did he want? Why had he gotten involved in the lives of 2 people who were essentially strangers? What was driving his unusual behavior? "I want," Marcus said slowly, "to remember what it feels like to use my advantages to create opportunities instead of just accumulating wealth. I want to do something that matters beyond my bank account." Carmen studied his face, searching for signs of deception or hidden agenda. Apparently satisfied with what she saw, she nodded once. Okay, she said. But I need you to promise me something. What's that? Promise me that if I get this job, you won't treat me like a charity case. I want to succeed or fail based on my own merits, not because you're watching out for me. I promise, Marcus said. And, as the words left his mouth, he realized that Carmen Johnson was about to teach him lessons about pride, dignity, and self-determination that no business school had ever covered. Zoe smiled, the first completely uninhibited expression he'd seen from her. I'd like that, she said simply. As the elevator doors closed, Marcus stood in the empty lobby, thinking about the conversation that had just ended and the strange way his evening had unfolded. He'd missed his dinner with the Dubai investors, but found that he didn't care as much as he would have expected. Walking back to his car, Marcus pulled out his phone to call his assistant and reschedule the meeting. But, as he scrolled through his contacts, he found himself thinking about Carmen's mention of overnight work and Zoe's careful way of eating her sandwich, as if she wasn't sure when her next meal might come. By the time he reached his Bentley, Marcus was already formulating a plan. It was impulsive, possibly foolish, definitely outside his usual way of operating. But something about this evening had reminded him that there were different kinds of investments, different ways of measuring return. He had a feeling that this was just the beginning of a story that would change everything he thought he knew about wealth, family, and what it really meant to be successful.